My fiancé laughed when I said my dog was my emotional support, so I removed myself from his wedding guest list. He said, "It's just a dumb animal," right in front of me. So I packed my dog, my suitcase, and the wedding gift I bought for his cousin, and disappeared the night before his big day. He cried when I posted the truth. I guess I always assumed the man I was about to marry understood me, not just on the surface, but all the way down. The kind of understanding that doesn't come from shared favorite movies or how you both like your coffee, but from seeing each other fall apart and choosing to stay. That's why what happened at that dinner table hit me like a punch I never saw coming. It was just a week before the wedding, and we were having dinner with his family, a loud, boisterous group that thrived on sarcasm and inside jokes. Everyone was in high spirits, running through final details for the big day. Seating charts, song choices, the usual chaos. Someone casually asked if we planned on doing any traveling after the honeymoon, maybe bringing my dog along for the ride. I smiled, happy for a soft, light-hearted moment, and said I'd actually already started looking into accommodations that allowed emotional support animals. I didn't even get to finish the sentence before he cut in. He let out this loud, dismissive snort, the kind people do when they want everyone else to laugh along, and said, "It's just a dumb animal. You act like it's a person or something." That was it. One sentence. Sharp. Casual. Cruel. The table erupted in laughter. His mother chuckled into her wine. His sister smirked. Even his best man clapped him on the back like he'd just delivered a killer joke. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, frozen in place like the wind had been knocked out of me. Because Cooper isn't just a dog. I adopted Cooper 2 years ago after my mother died suddenly. I was spiraling, no appetite, no sleep, no direction. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to exist. And then one afternoon, I walked into a shelter on a whim and locked eyes with this quiet, gold-furred dog who looked just as lost as I felt. I took him home that same day. He didn't fix me, he just stayed. Sat beside me when I couldn't get out of bed. Rested his head on my lap during panic attacks. Licked tears off my cheeks without judgment. He was the one living being who didn't ask me to explain myself. He just knew. And now, the man I was supposed to marry, the one who had seen me sob into Cooper's fur, who had watched that dog calm me during my worst nights, had the nerve to humiliate me over it, in front of people who already saw my sensitivity as a flaw. I didn't defend myself. I didn't launch into a monologue about grief or therapy or the science behind emotional support animals. I didn't say anything at all. I just looked at him. And for the first time, really saw him, not as the man I loved, but as someone who had never quite taken the time to understand the weight I carried. Someone who thought love meant tolerating the weird parts of your partner, instead of respecting them. That night, I didn't sleep. Not a single minute. It wasn't nerves about the wedding or last-minute stress. It was that quiet, still feeling in my chest, the one that doesn't scream or cry, just hums with the low, unmistakable sound of clarity. I've learned to listen to that feeling. It shows up when something is wrong, but you've been too in love, too hopeful, too tired to see it. And in that silence, I started asking the question I hadn't let myself ask until now. If he can laugh at the one thing that saved my life, what else is he willing to laugh off? After that dinner, everything looked the same on the surface. The wedding plans continued, the text thread stayed active, the countdown clock on our wedding website kept ticking. But inside me, something had shifted. There's a certain kind of grief that comes when you realize the person you're with isn't who you thought they were, and worse, maybe never was. I tried to act normal. I smiled at the dress fitting, nodded through the caterer tasting, thanked guests for their RSVPs. But underneath, I was watching him. Really watching him. And what I saw were all the cracks I had ignored for far too long. He wasn't cruel. That would have been easier, actually. He was dismissive in that subtle, socially acceptable way that makes you doubt your own reactions. When I brought up wanting a smaller wedding, something more personal and less performative, he laughed and said, "Don't worry, the whole day will be about you, just like always." When I expressed anxiety about standing in front of 200 people, he said, "It's just one day. Suck it up and get through it." When I said I didn't want to invite my estranged uncle, he overrode me completely. "It's not a real wedding without all the family," he said. "This isn't just about you." Over and over again, my voice was muted in the name of compromise. Only it wasn't compromise, it was quiet submission. I was constantly the one folding, adjusting, editing myself. I started to realize I was living inside a relationship that had only ever made room for one version of me, the agreeable one. The easygoing one. The one who didn't cry too hard, didn't need too much, didn't cling too tightly to her trauma. And Cooper? Cooper was a symbol of all the parts of me he didn't want to deal with. My mental health. My history of panic attacks. My grief. That dog represented the emotional mess he had decided to ignore once I stopped talking about it openly. When I was deep in depression, he held me. But once I started functioning again, he expected it to be over. Like healing had an expiration date. Like I was only lovable if I stayed fixed. It was such a slow realization, like water dripping onto stone. But once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. You remember every time he rolled his eyes when you brought up therapy. Every time he told you you were being dramatic. Every time you caught yourself apologizing for needing basic emotional support. The thing is, I wanted it to work. I really, really did. I wanted the dress, the vows, the cake, the dancing. I wanted to believe that I could mold myself into someone who fit better in his world, someone who didn't ask too many questions, didn't bring the dog everywhere, didn't carry the weight of her past into the future. I thought maybe if I just tried harder, he'd meet me halfway. But the harder I tried, the further away he felt. The wedding was 1 week away, and I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me how I was feeling. Not about flowers or guest counts, but me. My heart. My fear. My hope. The day before the wedding, he came home from work late. Barely looked up from his phone. Told me he was headed out again for one last night with the guys. Kissed the top of my head like I was a child, and left. Just like that. And there I was, alone in our apartment, surrounded by boxed-up decorations, gift bags, and the dress I wasn't sure I'd ever put on. Cooper sat beside me, resting his head on my foot like he always did when I started to spiral. I looked down at him and thought, "You see me. You always have." That night, I went into the guest room and unzipped my suitcase. I had packed it weeks ago, like a good bride, dress for his cousin's ceremony, heels I hated, makeup I barely knew how to apply. At the very bottom was the wedding gift I'd gotten for his cousin, a necklace with a quote she once said reminded her of her late brother. I had spent hours designing it. I pulled it out, sat on the bed, and stared at it. And I remember thinking, this isn't my life. This isn't my love story. This is a performance I've been cast in, and I'm not even the lead. I'm the set dressing. The easy partner. The smiling woman in the photos. But I'm not okay. And I can't keep pretending. When people think of breakups, especially just before a wedding, they imagine explosions. Screaming, accusations, one person begging while the other walks away in dramatic slow motion. But that's not how it happened for me. There was no yelling, no grand confrontation. Just stillness. A quiet, deliberate kind of unraveling. And I think that's what made it real. That night, with the apartment finally silent and his presence gone for a few hours, I walked into the bedroom, shut the door behind me, and just stood there. I let the silence settle around me like smoke. The wedding dress was still hanging on the closet door, pressed, steamed, perfectly preserved. A dress that didn't belong to me anymore. At least, not to the version of me I wanted to keep living as. I sat on the floor next to Cooper, leaned my back against the bed frame, and cried harder than I had in months. Not out of heartbreak, I wasn't heartbroken. I was grieving something different, the version of myself that had fought so hard to make this relationship work, who had silenced her gut over and over just to keep the peace. I cried because I realized I had stopped recognizing my own voice in that relationship. I had become a stranger to myself. And Cooper? He didn't move. He didn't bark. He didn't try to comfort me like a person would. He just stayed. Breathing in sync with mine. Letting me come apart, safely. Around 10:30 p.m., I stood up, walked into the guest room, and pulled my suitcase out from under the bed. I unzipped it slowly. I took out the bridesmaid dress, the shoes, the necklace, laid them all out on the bed like artifacts of a life I no longer belonged to. Then I started repacking, but not for the wedding. Just for me. I packed jeans, a hoodie, my favorite oversized t-shirt. I packed Cooper's travel bowl, his leash, a small bag of his food, his worn-out blanket he always curled up on during road trips. I didn't make a list. I didn't plan it. My hands just moved. I grabbed the wedding gift, the one I'd poured so much thought into, and placed it back in its original box. I didn't want to leave it behind to be rewrapped or repurposed like some recycled memory. It was coming with me. At 11:13 p.m., I clipped Cooper's leash on, took one last look at the apartment that held all the pieces of the life I thought I wanted, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The building was quiet. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I just walked. We got into the car, me and my dog, the dumb animal that had somehow shown me more loyalty and understanding than the man I was supposed to marry, and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I was already halfway there, a small, pet-friendly inn an hour out of town, somewhere we'd stayed once during a weekend hike the first year I had Cooper. I remembered how peaceful it was, how it smelled like cedar and fresh rain, how Cooper had fallen asleep by the window like he'd finally found home. It felt right. We checked in just after midnight. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed me the key with a soft smile when I said we'd only be staying for a few nights. The room was simple, a queen bed, a small couch, and big windows overlooking trees. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. Cooper jumped up after me, curled himself tightly against my legs, and sighed, that long, contented exhale that dogs do when they feel safe. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding but my mind strangely still. I should have felt fear. Or guilt. Or dread. But instead, I felt something else. Something almost foreign to me after months of forcing myself to play the part of the perfect bride. I felt peace. Not the glossy, Pinterest-perfect kind. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. The kind that says, this might hurt later, but at least it's real. Around 6:30 the next morning, my phone started buzzing. First his name. Then his mom. Then his sister. Then again. And again. The messages were pouring in, voicemails, texts, missed calls. I watched the screen light up and go dark. Light up. Go dark. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Instagram. Took a photo of Cooper curled up at my feet on the bed. The morning light catching his fur. Peaceful. Whole. True. I wrote one line. Turns out my emotional support dog supported me more than my fiancé ever did. Then I hit post, closed the app, and went back to sleep. I expected chaos when I woke up again, the emotional kind, the digital kind, the kind that comes after you leave someone at the altar without a word. But when I opened my eyes that morning, lying in that quiet hotel room with Cooper still curled up at my feet, I didn't feel panic. I felt clarity. That same strange calm I'd felt the night before, like my body had finally stopped bracing for a blow that had already landed months ago. When I finally turned my phone back on, it exploded. I had over 70 unread messages. My Instagram post had already been shared dozens of times, and I had unread DMs from friends, acquaintances, even people I barely knew. Some were confused. Some were stunned. But most of them said the same thing. I saw the signs, but didn't want to overstep. I'm proud of you. That took guts. Are you safe? The voicemail from him was just under a minute long. His voice was shaking, but not from sadness, from disbelief. He kept repeating, "You really did this? You really just walked out?" There was no apology. No acknowledgement. Just shock that I hadn't played the part he'd written for me. His next message was angrier. "You humiliated me. In front of everyone. You couldn't have just talked to me?" And there it was, the truth, buried in his choice of words. Not, "I'm sorry for making you feel small." Not, "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." Just, "You embarrassed me." Everything he said proved exactly why I had to leave. What followed was a string of calls from his family. His mother's voicemail made my blood run cold. She wasn't screaming, but every word was soaked in venom. "You've ruined our family's name. You've humiliated my son. And over what? A dog?" She said the word like it was filth. I didn't call her back. There was no point. I knew exactly what she saw when she looked at me, a runaway bride with mental health issues and a leash. She never understood me, and she never tried. By the end of the day, I had texted just a few people back, my closest friends. The ones who had really seen me the last few months. One of them, my college roommate, Elena, offered to drive out to meet me. She showed up 3 hours later with Thai food, cheap wine, and a look on her face like she'd been holding her breath for a year. "I wanted to say something so many times," she told me that night. "But you looked so committed. And I thought, maybe you knew what you were doing." I nodded. "So did I said. We didn't talk much after that. Just ate noodles and watched Cooper stretch out in his sleep like he'd been handed the biggest bed in the world. There was something oddly healing about the simplicity of it, no drama, no explanations. Just two women sitting in a hotel room, one recovering from a wedding that never happened, the other silently grateful that her friend had finally woken up. Word spread fast. By the next morning, mutual friends started messaging me. Some were supportive. Some were uncomfortable. One of his groomsmen sent me a single line, "Honestly? Respect." Another, who I had never even gotten along with, said, "You dodged a bullet." We all saw it. That was the part that hit me the hardest, we all saw it. People knew. They saw how he spoke to me. How he laughed at me. How I disappeared into the background of my own relationship. But no one said anything. Because I looked like I could handle it. Because I smiled. Because I showed up and made it look easy. I'd spent so long being the cool girl, the chill partner, the one who didn't make a scene, didn't cry in public, didn't demand to be heard. And for what? So people could look back later and say, "We had a feeling?" There was no wedding. No ceremony. No vows. Just silence. His side of the family scrambled to explain it however they could. Some said I had a breakdown, others claimed I ran off with someone else. I let them say whatever they needed to. They were never going to tell the truth, and frankly, I didn't owe them mine. What I did do quietly, deliberately, was send back the wedding gift I had taken. Not out of guilt. Out of closure. I wrote no note. I simply mailed it to his cousin's house, fully packaged, with the engraving still inside. Let it be a reminder, I thought. Of what I gave. And of what I walked away from. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about hurting him back. It was about reclaiming my life, not just from him, but from the version of myself I had become around him. The quieter, softer, shrinking version. The one who sat silently at dinner while people laughed at the one creature that had held her together. I wasn't angry. I was done. And sometimes, being done is the loudest thing you can be. There's a strange quiet that follows after you blow up your life, not the screaming kind, not the chaos people imagine, but a low hum of stillness. When the messages stop. When the gossip dies down. When no one's asking questions anymore because they've moved on and assumed you have too. That's when the real work starts. That's when rebuilding begins. The first few weeks were rough. Even though I knew I'd made the right decision, it didn't mean I didn't grieve. Because walking away from someone you love, or someone you thought you loved, isn't just about letting go of the person. It's about letting go of the vision you had for your future. The shared apartment. The wedding playlist. The lazy Sundays. The possibility of what could have been if they had just seen you fully, and chosen to meet you there. I spent a lot of those early mornings crying into Cooper's fur, whispering half-formed thoughts like, why wasn't I enough? Or how did I let it get this far? He never answered, of course. But he never walked away either. He just stayed. Present. Unbothered. Real. Eventually, I stopped crying. Not because the hurt was gone, but because something else started to grow in its place, relief. A sense of breath returning to my body, like I didn't have to keep bracing myself anymore. I could just be. Sad. Quiet. Healing. Alive. I signed the lease on a small apartment about 40 minutes outside the city. It's nothing fancy, hardwood floors, creaky cabinets, second-hand furniture, but it's mine. For the first time in years, I chose a space without anyone else's opinion in the mix. I painted the bedroom pale green. Hung fairy lights even though he used to say they were college girl tacky. I put Cooper's bed next to mine, even though people say dogs should sleep on the floor. I made a home for us. Just us. I started therapy again. And this time, I didn't go to fix myself. I went to meet myself. To ask hard questions. To unpack the habits I had developed to survive, the silence, the shrinking, the over-apologizing, and figure out which parts of me were authentic, and which were just armor. My therapist asked me once, when did you first learn that your feelings were inconvenient? And I cried so hard I gave myself a headache. Organization that trains emotional support dogs. It wasn't some dramatic act of reinvention. It was just something that felt aligned. Something that let me give back to the quiet, four-legged kind of love that saved me. Cooper would come with me sometimes and sit beside the new dogs, calm, unbothered, the elder statesman of the group. Watching him sit there, alert, patient, proud, I realized that love doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be constant. One afternoon, I posted a short update, nothing dramatic, no long caption, just a photo of Cooper sitting in our new apartment next to the sunlit window. Someone from my past commented, "You look lighter. Like you're finally breathing." And they were right. I was breathing. I wasn't trying to be over it. I wasn't pretending to be unbothered. I was just being honest. And free. And, for the first time in years, whole. Do I still think about him? Sometimes. Not with longing, but with a strange kind of curiosity. Like, who was that person I almost married? And more importantly, who was I when I said yes to him? I don't hate him. I don't even wish him harm. I just hope, one day, he learns that loving someone means making space for all of them, not just the convenient parts. I hope he sees what he lost, not because I need him to hurt, but because I need me to remember, I was never too much. I was just asking for the kind of love that doesn't flinch when things get heavy. And as for Cooper? He's still here. Still nudging my hand when I stay up too late writing. Still climbing onto the couch with zero respect for boundaries. Still sighing loudly when I forget his dinner by 5 minutes. He's not perfect. He's not just a dog. He's my proof. That the right kind of love doesn't laugh at your scars. It doesn't ask you to be smaller. It doesn't roll its eyes when you say you need help. It stays. It shows up. It sits beside you when you fall apart and doesn't ask you to clean up fast. This story doesn't end with a new man or some grand romantic twist. It ends here, in a small apartment with a golden retriever and a woman who finally remembered who she was before she started explaining herself to everyone. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I've ever known.